world surrounded by franchises, reboots, and shared universes. An elite team of podcasters will risk body and soul to investigate the depths of intellectual properties, one multiverse, subgenre, and trend at a time. Who are we? We're the IP Squad. Welcome to the IP Squad, our current investigation into the adaptations of the works of Stephen King. I'm John Campbell. My partner in this investigation, Elliott Lewis.
Sorry, John. I got eaten by a clown when
Oh,
I was
no.
investigating the sewers, so...
I hate when that happens. You know, you got to watch out for those clowns and sewers. It's just...
It's true.
There's more than you think. You hear about it all the time, and you just don't think it's going to happen to you. Yeah.
I never thought it would happen to me.
Well, actually, kind of part of the novel, it has that penthouse storyline. So, yes, we're talking about It, which, of course, I mean, I think we keep using this term, but it's like this really is the big one, right? I mean, especially when it comes to adaptations as well.
Yeah, you were saying before we started that this novel is really ripe for adaptation because and I think what interestingly the between the 1990 and the 2017/2019
Yes
remakes, it the core is distilled, I think, even further in the newer adaptations, which we'll talk about when we get there.
Oh yeah.
But there's a pretty standard coming of age story within there that lends itself really well to the horror and fantastical elements as well.
Yes. I mean that's it exactly. The thing about the book is it's to once again borrow from Just King Things. It's one of his doorstop novels, right?
Yes,
it's this 1,000-page thing that when you look at it, you would go like, "Good Lord, how do you adapt something that huge?" Similar to The Stand, but unlike The Stand, really is this sprawling, massive epic. Mm-hmm. If you actually boil it down to its plot points, it's actually very simple and at least for a good chunk of it, kind of a YA novel. I mean,
yeah.
King talks about watching, because we're talking about the 1990 miniseries today, but so I watched this documentary that came out a couple years ago called Pennywise: The Story of It, which is primarily about the making of the miniseries. But they get into the origins of the book a little bit, and King talks about that this was his troll under a bridge sort of fairy tale thing. So when you go to that, you're like, oh, well, why would that be a 1,000-page epic?
Well, because King also really likes to just tell a bunch of story. He can't just tell one story. Mm-hmm. He has to tell a bunch of different stories within whatever he's doing.
And even within the core idea of it being inherently two stories, because it's about the reflection of childhood to adulthood, even within that there's still tangents. He already has 7 main characters in 2 time periods.
There's 7 fucking kids,
and then he
doesn't even have the endurance to do it for all of them, really.
No,
because Stan is just kind of left out to dry a little bit.
He literally, it does feel like that, where he's just like, I guess I gotta kill one of them because I can't possibly cover all of these people, right? But then it's also let's also get the entire backstory of Henry Bowers, who's the, the bully of the thing. And you're just like, okay, yeah, sure, man. And then while you're at it, let's get the entire history of Mike Hanlon's family in the town. And you're like, Jesus Christ, man, I understand.
And
but
let's get the entire history of Derry, and let's get the entire history of the monster, and let's get the entire history of the universe in there just for good measure.
It goes back to our Shining episode where we talk about King's issues with that movie are because that movie is so purposely vague, and that is so the antithesis of what King
really
there will be no doubt in your mind what is happening in a King novel. The man does not leave a lot up to the imagination. It really is like, here's the exact, because one of the big things, of course, that's not in this adaptation that I'm sure people talk about is the turtle. And we, which is God to a certain extent, or maybe an extension of God, or a lesser demigod sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's weird King creationism myth that's also in here. Because why not?
Like, yeah, because the most that you get from really either of the adaptations is that it came from space. It came from space.
No, I mean, it really does kind of boil down to that sort of 1950s alien invasion thing, right? And especially in this, because it's literally the 50s in this adaptation, which is true to the book. But then also in there is this is sort of King's very autobiographical, right? I mean, in some ways he talks about broadly so, right? I mean, it's him recalling his own childhood, and they have a quote from him in the Pennywise documentary as well. That is, he talked about as he sat down and started thinking about his childhood, he started remembering. His memory became clearer, so that becomes a whole part of it where it's like, oh, there's actually like sort of almost a fantastical reason why we've all forgotten this, and now as we're being reminded of it. So it is very King in that he's getting at very approachable things, but then there's other stuff where he's just off in space, literally sometimes.
Yeah, literally, yeah. In the macroverse.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating because I re-listened to the audiobook earlier this year. I've mentioned that a couple of times, probably off air.
Yeah.
But I didn't finish it because the other thing that does not, partly because it just is so long. The audiobook is like, I think 48 hours.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah, it's insane.
It's absolutely ridiculous. Partly because it's just so long, and I think I had been listening to it like every day, and it's just it wears on you. The prose style, it wears. It wears on me specifically.
Yeah, no, I have a similar thing.
The royal you, it wears on
a
little bit.
Yeah, because I was saying to you, I tried to reread it a while ago because I read it, like every King nerd in middle school or whatever. And I think back and I go, how the fuck did I get through it? Like as a kid, as like a like a 14, like of the age of the kids in the book. And I'm just thinking about I wasn't like reading tomes, but it was just being a little nerd. And I guess there was less to distract me too in that time. I could just sit there and read King for hours. So
it's true.
Yeah, I think that, but I tried to reread a couple years ago, and I put it down kind of like you're talking, because I was just like, oh my god, I forgot just how dense this is, and also like it's weirdly written too, right? Like, I mean, he switches between narration, like first and third narration, and it's unclear who's narrating at times, and it's a weird people's memory of it. I really, doing this episode is really making me go like, people really are remembering this miniseries, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is the case, because this miniseries, because that's what we're here to primarily talk about, not the book, but like this miniseries was a phenomenon when it came on. And I think that it really, so many people when they talk about their memories of it, once again, it seems like it's this, and there's a whole part of the documentary about that, about how it scared generations of children. Even King has a quote about that where he's just like, the reason the new movies were successful, King is like, is because people still remembered how scared they were of the miniseries, which is really interesting watching it again, because it's not that. I mean, it's scary
Like,
in concept.
yeah, and one of the things that I was reading that they probably talk about in the documentary more is that like the fear is more from like the reactions of the actors
Yeah,
to what is going to like something possibly they're seeing off screen, because the miniseries was on a bought the right, it was ABC, I
it
think,
was
right?
ABC. Yeah, yeah,
ABC, which is a network,
yeah.
a network channel, and there were a lot of restrictions on what they could and could not do,
They
and what they could and could not show. So
they talk
it
about in the
does,
documentary that when they first submitted it, standards was like, you can't air this. And
yeah,
the thing that won them that battle without having to make any cuts is finally the makers of the thing just going, "What did you think you were buying?"
yeah. I mean, right? Like that's part of the thing is like, yeah, wow, this Stephen King book is so successful and it's so big and impressive. Like, oh, we want to get the rights to that. It's
Yeah.
like, did anyone read it though?
No, that's it
Like,
exactly. Yeah, right. I mean, that's the thing. But I thought that was interesting. Where they were like, so they ended up getting from a rejection to an approve without making any cuts, basically just on a logic argument of you fucking asked for it, and we took
yeah,
out all the like inherently graphic stuff. I mean, because it doesn't violate anything. I mean, one could say from a modern perspective that this is extremely tame, especially compared to the R-rated Andy Muschietti adaptations. But it's all in concept that you couldn't cut it. I think that was their argument too. Is like, we can't cut anything because your issues are just, it's so fucking inherently dark.
yeah. And like the yeah, the one that seemed the most like nobody read this book to me was that like the standards and practices rule of you cannot have children in direct danger. It's like
I don't even know.
literally the entire book is children in danger.
Yeah, yeah. I don't, yeah. It's like I don't even know what you wanted to do. And they do show in the documentary. They show the little warning that aired before it, where it's like, tonight on ABC we present this. If those who know, it's like be prepared for this and this and this and subject matter, and you're like, oh, okay. But of course, they also talked about one of the things that made this such a cult phenomenon when it came on was it was on ABC. So you can put up that warning, but you can't actually stop kids from watching it. So a whole generation of kids saw this at a really young age, and we'll talk about that when we get to the user reviews later. That's a big indelible thing, and I think that's a thing that really carries this, and talk about sort of the nostalgic coding of it, not in quality, but in terms of how scary it is. It's just like, I was 8 and I turned this on, and it fucking terrified me.
Like I there are a couple of bits in it that because like right, it aired 3 years before I was born,
Right.
but they would play reruns of it
Right,
on
right. Yes.
various
Oh, yeah, yeah,
channels.
yeah. Absolutely.
So I also watched it at probably way too young, and
Yeah.
not the whole thing, because as we've talked about on different podcasts, I was a scaredy cat when I was a
Same
kid.
here. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you and I grew up to be such horror buffs.
We've talked about this. I find that this is this is a common thread amongst horror buffs, is we are like repelled, and then eventually that leads to some sort of fascination. I similarly saw it as a kid on TV because I love, and still do, he's still one of my favorite actors, Tim Curry. Was a
Oh yeah.
big reason why I was like, ooh, it was a Stephen King thing, which Stephen King was always like that. He was one of the few people who we had like all of his books in the house. So Stephen King was an omnipresent thing in my life. And then it was like, ooh, this, and it's Tim Curry, who I love. But it's also scary. So I do think it was sort of a creeping, like from behind the couch kind of watching
Yeah.
of it. And
Oh, absolutely.
yeah,
But like Eddie being like cornered in the showers with like the shower heads moving and him coming up out of the
yeah,
drain, like that one, like, right, it's one of those things, like, as an adult, I'm like this is neat, but like,
Yeah.
it's not really that scary.
Right.
And the balloon coming out of Beverly's sink and then exploding
That's
with
the
the
one I
blood, like
remember.
that
Yeah.
was, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, right, like, right, those things, looking back and watching them as a grown up, I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's like, it's gross. I mean, that's the thing. It's like the delineation between things that are just gross and
Hmm.
things that are scary is like a much harder line for me as a grown up.
Yeah. And because those often get crossed over in horror movies, I feel like most horror movies I see lean gross more than scary.
Hmm.
Like how many horror? I mean, we probably between the two of us consume far more horror content than most human beings. How much stuff truly like frightens you? It's pretty rare that something like really gets under my skin. Maybe fleeting moments in movies, but like there are only a handful of movies that have come out in the last several years where I'm like, because
Yeah.
that's more tactile than like. I mean, it's very easy to startle anyone with a loud
Oh
noise.
yeah. Like, right. That's like the kind of the most like culturally mainstream like criticism of modern horror is
Yes.
the over reliance on the jump scare.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to. But I've seen that criticism leveled at the newer It movies,
Yeah.
and you're like, once again, it's not. I mean, it's true, but it's also like it's so ubiquitous that I like to hold those movies against it specifically.
Hmm.
But I think but that's not what I think. Sometimes people go like the Conjuring movies or the Insidious movies that are really sort of haunted house jump scares. When people talk about those being scary, I'm like, yeah, they're like startling. It takes a lot to truly like unsettle me, and often it's the subtler
Yeah.
stuff that does it. And there is imagery in this that is just unsettling, especially if you see it at a young age. A big thing I think that speaks to this, though, the way we're watching it now and going, I don't know if it's really that scary. Tommy Lee Wallace, who directed this, of course, and I don't know if he's actually credited with, but he essentially wrote all of part two. I can't remember if he actually
Oh,
gets credit for
interesting.
it. They talk about this in the documentary because this is also the same screenwriter as the De Palma Carey movie.
Oh,
Is the
okay.
initial and but he had to go and do another project, and everybody was like, well, part one cooks, it's just great,
Yeah.
but part two needs a lot of work, and he was not able to do it. So Tommy Lee Wallace, it sort of fell to him. Oh yeah, okay, so Wallace does get credit for, yeah, Lawrence D. Cohen, who wrote Carrie, wrote part one, and Tommy Lee Wallace wrote part two.
Okay.
And Tommy Lee Wallace, he's great in the documentary because he's very upfront of it. He's like, no, I did the best I could. Because everybody kind of knows. Oh, I don't want to get to that. Just but anyway, something he says
Okay,
about the
okay.
scary thing is he also had to go do another thing and wasn't able to color time this. And when he saw it, he went, "Oh no, it's too bright. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't
Yep.
be this bright." And it was
Yep.
just like, well, too bad it airs, next week or whatever. Well, fuck, man. And he goes to this
Yeah.
day. He goes, every time I see it, he goes, I just want to go in there and tinker with it. And just bring the levels down. Like he just goes like it wasn't supposed to, but somebody whoever did do it was a network TV person. Goes, oh, it's a network TV thing. We'll light it like that. It's like,
Hmm.
no, that wasn't how it was supposed to look. So he's got, and I think that is key because I was struck by that, especially the high def version of it that's out there
Yep.
is
It's
like
a
it's
lot of stuff happens in the daytime.
and it
And
really it all
works more, it does work better in part one.
yes
Maybe the color correcting is like something that like I like was subtle enough that I didn't really notice it. But I feel like stuff happening in the daytime works better for the kid stuff than
well
it does for the grown-up stuff.
the clips they showed when he was talking about this was a lot of the like underground stuff, and once they're in
Mm,
its lair, and
I
that's
see.
a lot of stuff too where it's like, well, that's also like the set bound stuff.
Yeah.
It's like,
But
oh,
it
you weren't supposed to
definitely
show that much of the set, like
When I was watching it last night,
Yeah.
I definitely had some moments of like, oh wow, guys, I thought we were in its lair, but it seems we have accidentally stumbled onto a set from the 1960s Star Trek
Yeah,
show.
yeah, I think that's very much where he's just like, we didn't build it to be shown that much.
Ugh.
I also love him going. He was just like, I don't know. He goes, I got to the end of the book and I went, oh, it's a giant spider. That's kind of lame. And then it was just kind of like, we got to shoot. All right, fuck it. It's a spider. Okay, yeah, it's a spider because it's got to be something. Like
It did have to be something. That is true.
See, this is where I was gonna. Okay, so this is where I'm transitioning back to where I. We all know that the adult stuff is not as interesting as the kid stuff, right? I mean, that's where the reaction to this miniseries, and then I distinctly remember when Chapter 2 came out, and there was I wouldn't, that movie was still successful, and I think people liked it, but there was sort of a like, no, it's not. It's like, I think probably you had the same reaction too. It was like, well, of course. Like, I don't know what to do. There's good stuff in the adult stuff, and I think the characters are still interesting, but like, yeah, the inherently visceral experience of it is as a story about kids.
Yeah, like I know the story of Finn Wolfhard like being like, I want Bill Hader to play adult Richie.
Yeah.
So it maybe doesn't serve the next thing I'm about to say, but I sort of feel like maybe the rest of the adult cast was like really star packed because they were like, maybe people aren't gonna like don't really maybe care about this one as much, so like we gotta get
it's McAvoy, it's Jessica Chastain.
Yeah, McAvoy. We gotta get oh my god, I just can't remember any of their names.
Jessica Chastain is Bev.
Yeah, Jessica Chastain.
Yeah. The guy who was the Old Spice guy is Hanlon.
Ibrahim.
Is it Isaiah Mustafa?
Isaiah Mustafa.
I think is right.
I think that's who it is.
I mean, who are all good actors.
Like, right, they're all good actors.
But there definitely was
it's
sense.
not to say that any of them were bad, but it just, Isaiah Mustafa. Yeah, you're right.
He's good. Yeah.
He's really good.
Yeah. But it is like, and McAvoy as Bill makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're like, oh, that is the leading man part.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's also an everyman. I do really like Richard Thomas as Bill in this. Because one of the interesting things that was very different about in the case of it, because I think people forget because of the newer movies that the book jumps back and forth a lot.
Yes.
Constantly. It's a thing where I actually like the chapter 1 and 2 of the movie's approach, where you see a children's story and then it's reflected, because I think just King Things put their finger on this too. It's like you end up with two stories happening. The glaring difference between them is much clearer when they're happening side by side, and you literally have the climaxes happening simultaneously, as opposed to it being what King is trying to get at. I think is actually better reflected in those newer movies. In it's something that happens as a kid, and then we're reconfronting it as an adult, and it's two separate tales.
Yeah, it's because in terms of like quote unquote faithfulness, the 1990 miniseries is a lot closer, even in that regard. Like they do show the climax of how they of defeating it when they're kids, way like kind of early.
Yeah,
but they do more of the flashing back.
Yes.
During the adult story, like right. The miniseries begins with the kid murder in 1990 and Mike Hanlon calling everybody.
Yeah, which I actually think is really effective in this. I like that beginning.
Yeah.
If you haven't read the book and you're just like, oh god, this kid is murdered. And then you don't know who Mike Hanlon is. Once again, if you're coming to this not knowing the book, and he's just like, oh god, it's happening again. That's really effective. It is a good way to jump in. But I was going to say, the interesting thing is, because of these two different approaches, in the 1990 miniseries, they cast a bunch of stars, big network TV stars in all the adult roles, and then cast kids to reflect them. Whereas, of course, doing chapter 1 and 2, you were casting kids first, and then the adults that would play them. And I do agree, nothing, Finn Wolfhard was dead on, because Bill Hader as Richie Tozier is the best piece of casting in that second part by far. That's just I don't think anybody else could have done it.
Like I thought it would be so distracting, but it worked way better. And maybe maybe other people it was distracting for them, but maybe I was going in being like so expected for it to be so weird, but it worked so well for me. Yeah.
So what it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, of course, that's who'd play it. And actually, I feel that way about the kid casting in this, where it's like, I don't think and even they talked about that Seth Green in the casting of this, he was on another job, and they're like, well, he can't come back for the callback, and they're like, we're going to move heaven and earth because the casting department is like, the network doesn't know it yet, but only Seth Green can play Richie Tozier. And you're like, yeah, of course, because especially now we so know Seth Green that you're like, oh yeah, the guy who's like a known voice actor and comedian. And of course, it is very funny being a fan of Buffy to see that it's the werewolf that is terrorizing Richie in this. Mm-hmm. And you're like, you're going to be a werewolf in a couple years.
You don't know it yet, but you're going to be a werewolf.
You're going to be a rockin' werewolf. Yeah, it's so that's. So I think it's very interesting though to see that, where then here they're going like, okay, well, who's young John Ritter, and yeah, and they do talk about that. Ritter, that casting was like, okay, that's the least like one-to-one visual, but that Ritter worked really hard with that kid so that their physical mannerisms would match up.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Every part of so much of the documentary is just like, oh, John Ritter was the most wonderful man ever.
Yeah, and he was also a huge King fan.
King fan.
He was like given 120% for this.
They seem like he was the guy who was jazzed to be there. Seemed like he was there when they were shooting a lot of the stuff with the kids, because the kids talk about spending a lot of time with him, and it just seems like he was just like psyched to be there. And yeah, every story I've ever heard about that guy is that friend of the show, Brendan Jones, has a great story about meeting him as a kid, where he was like beyond nice to him.
That's lovely.
It's so sad that he died way too young, he's one of the best things in the adult part. I think is actually I think one of the things that does, we're talking about whether or not you were talking earlier about how like a lot of the scares are based on the performances. I think the thing that really props us up is the casting in this is really good. Like everybody's pretty good, I think.
Yeah. I don't. Young Bill, it just.
Oh yeah, he's Jonathan Brandis. He was Tiger Beat, and he does feel that. He feels 90s as well. He doesn't feel 50s. I do agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know, and it's very odd because 4 years later he goes off to really crush being the voice of Mosenrath in the Aladdin television series. So like, I don't know what's going on here, because he's just.
I know him as the kid from Sequest.
There are moments where he really comes through. I think his like facial acting is pretty good, but there was some disconnect. Because every line he says just sounds really disingenuous, and it doesn't make a lot of and that's kind of a bad thing, because it's Bill and he's like the protagonist.
He's the earnest hero de facto of the. He's the character who's he's the leader of the group. That's like his thing, right? And in their Magnificent Seven-esque whatever Avengers team or whatever, he's your Captain America, right? Like he's the. He's also Stephen King, believe it or not, folks.
So is Ben, and so is Richie, sort of. But you know what?
They're all kind of.
If I was going to write a 1,000-page novel with 7 kids in it, I would make 3 or 4 of them me.
Yeah.
Just for ease of.
Yes.
Of
yeah.
writing.
I guess this one's sort of that part of my personality. Yeah, you can definitely be like where he's clearly like, what if I was smart? What if I was funny? What if I. So no, I agree with that because he was definitely a flavor of the moment, Brandis.
Yeah.
And he does have he reads the least as real kid to me.
Yeah.
That was a big thing when they talked about casting Bev was one of the hardest parts of it because they were really looking for something extremely specific with that character. And they find Emily Perkins, who, if you're a listener of Meet the Monsters, you've heard us heap tons of praise on her for the Ginger Snaps movies. Which
Oh yeah.
yeah, she goes on to be in those, which are the first one's great. The other two are not good, but she is always the bright spot in those. And that was one of the things they were looking for was which I think she has is they were just talking about like sort of I guess like something like an old soul is sort of a cliche, but it's that kind of thing, right? Like a kid who's got a weight to her, and that's I think she's great in that, and also the casting of her once again casting her as young Annette O'Toole. She might actually be the closest in terms of looking like.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, 100% when you go from her to that. But yeah, I think she's great. And Bev, of course, falls into the like she's the girl of the group, which unfortunately puts a lot of weight on that character.
Yeah.
But how good Emily Perkins is in the part is, and it's the same thing. They strike gold again with Sophia Lillis in the newer movie, which of course was like, fuck, she's amazing, has continued to be amazing and everything. But like, yeah, they're good enough that they kind of are able to sail past just being the girl in the group, even if that's on paper what it is.
Yeah.
It helps
And
that they also cut out, of course, we have to say it, the most baffling part of the book.
The reason I wasn't able to finish the book because I was like, oh yeah, God, I forgot about that because I keep trying to forget about it. I can't.
It's a thing, and I understand they talk about it in the Just King things. There are people who vehemently defend that, to which is like,
couldn't be me.
no, I don't. I'm like, I get what you're trying to do, but it's one of those things where it's like, but how do you not see?
Yeah.
What do you? It's like, so I get it, but like, this is the way you chose to deal with like burgeoning sexuality as part of the coming of age. Okay. Yeah, Emily Perkins talks about in the Pennywise documentary that there was a lot of mockery of that because all the boys had read the book and she hadn't, and so there was a lot of like, it's her surrounded by 12 and 13-year-old boys, so they're gonna be awful. And then she finally said she read the book. She was like, ugh. Yeah. She talked about there was a lot of they were her best friends or she fucking hated them on a day-to-day basis. And so I'm like,
well, yeah.
But oh no. So anyway, but yeah, I people are gonna that's a thing that's unfortunately like also a thing that you can't just put into the book and not expect that that's going to be something everyone remembers about the book. So you can't discuss it without bringing up the child orgy or whatever you want to call it. And both versions just excise it.
Which is such a good idea. And I really don't, I mean, between the network or broadcast standards and practices and the better protections I think we have for child actors today, there's no way that it was going to happen anyway.
In fact, even before that, Lawrence Cohen, who's the screenwriter, part one, goes like, "Oh, I didn't even," because that just got crossed out instantly in my adaptation.
Yeah,
there was no way I was going to include that, regardless of network rules or anything. You instead get, which I think is in the book too. You get that more cute, innocent scene where she's like, I'm on a date with you, and kisses him on the cheek. You're like, there you go. That's cute. That's kid innocence. Yeah. That's about as much as 12-year-old me could have dealt with probably in terms of sexuality. Anyway, Jesus Christ.
Listen, I still get a little red in the face if I think about holding hands with someone. Like,
oh my, dear Lord. Yeah. But yeah, so I think that the it's all part of that though. The content aside on that, it is all getting at, it's all doing a great. It's interesting that it's the same guy who wrote Carrie, because that's something we really praise that movie for, by streamlining a lot of stuff. And I think what this does, one of the things that is very successful in this 3-ish, a little over 3 hours, both parts together, is it does get to the core of the story really well. It doesn't include everything, of course, and the initial idea. Go again.
Because those things are not necessarily necessary.
One of the things I didn't know until I was doing research for this, and I read it on the IMDb, and then they also talk about it in the documentary, was this, like Pet Sematary, was originally given to George Romero. He was going to make this, but he wanted to do it as an 8 to 10 part event for TV. And then the network was like, no, we're thinking it's more like a 2-night movie. And he was like, then I'm out.
Yeah.
And so,
listen, I, like Stephen King, want to tell the whole story of Derry, all the kids' families, and the entire universe. So if I can't do that, I'm out.
That's a thing where it's like but it's getting at that thing where it's like, yeah, you don't need to include all of this. Like I said, something like The Stand, you couldn't do. Even when they did it on ABC, it was a 4-night event, because that's huge. But you really can. I mean, that was the thing about it. Chapter 1 was sort of like, we could just do this, and if this doesn't work, then if this doesn't go, we don't even have to make Chapter 2. Yeah. You can keep stripping this thing down. Because there's so much in it. It is in terms of, they have this conversation on Just King things, but what is the magnum opus? What is the masterpiece?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it is the most King book. It's not necessarily the best King book. But it is everything King does.
Yes.
In a tome.
All in one place.
Yeah. Which is not necessarily for the best, because it's all of his best and worst impulses in one massive thing. I think The Stand is a better epic in terms of, like, it's at least more, it's designed to be massive and sprawling.
That's true. I mean, fucking every King book contains the best and worst of King, if we're being honest.
It is true. Yeah, I mean, the guy, especially if you've read a lot of his stuff like we have, you really start to know the stuff he fixates on, both positive and where the stumbling blocks are. Because also, I think the other thing too is when we're talking about the second half of it not being as good, we're also used to a lot of King endings kind of being like, well, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just over.
Yeah, it just kind of wraps up. I also think the thing with it, watching this miniseries, thinking about the book, thinking about the movies we'll talk about later on, the Muschietti movies, it is almost designed to have a disappointing ending. Like, where it is just like, what could possibly deliver on the embodiment of all fear and evil being,
Yeah, and I mean, okay, so talking about adapting and what about the adaptation that we have and will have, what works and what does not work about it. So, like, the thing that is more, I think, necessary to me about the story, weirdly, is the, like, cosmic aspect of it. But it is so, like, I just don't see a reality in which that part is ever adapted.
Yeah.
Because I think that is part of what is disappointing about, like, oh, we confront this physical form and it's just like a weird spider. I think they do a pretty good job in the newer ones of, like, making it more, like, weirdly inconceivable, and it also, like, can like transmogrify its bits a little better.
I thought, when we discussed that, it's like I'm actually a pretty big defender of it, Chapter 2, because I think it inherently has a lot of the same disappointments, but there's a lot of smart decisions in it to at least try to make it work as a piece of film storytelling. Like, it does what a lot of good King adaptations do, where it's like, at a certain point, you have to make this a satisfying experience, and you have to be willing to move away from trying to just capture what King is doing. Because I think what you're talking about is similar to why there are so few good Lovecraft adaptations. Is so much of it is like, if you read Lovecraft, there is so much like, and then unknowable evil, and you're like, why do you literalize that?
What do you mean?
Like, it's
but so that's like what would be easier about King is because he's like, wow, it's a weird unknowable terror, but it looks exactly like this.
Yeah.
And it comes from a weird interdimensional space where there's also a big turtle.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So like it, yeah, I just, God, where was I going with this? Like, it's just a big spider and it came from space, and it's just like, okay, but like, sure.
Yeah.
What does that mean for all of us, though?
And
but,
you know, they do the things like the dead lights in this, right, and stuff like that, right, where it's like, oh, there's an entity that is there's something beyond the physical, but all that is beams of light in the movie.
And there's a lot of like telling instead of showing. Like Bill is just like, yeah, the deadlights. It's like, you know, it's this awful light where it really exists and it takes your soul there or something. I don't 100% remember what he says, but he just is like standing there. They're underground, and he's like, oh yeah, the deadlights.
Yeah,
we all know what that is. It's like, no, we don't.
What are you talking about, man? Yeah, poor Richard Thomas, who I think, because I do think Richard Thomas is a very good actor, but when you distill this down, Bill is very stock hero guy, and also weirdly, because him and Hanlon split the exposition character, right? But yeah, I think Bill comes out of this. You're talking about the Jonathan Brandis performance. I think it's also some of the writing, particularly in part 2, is Bill is just not very interesting in this. He's just not. He just doesn't have a lot of meat to him, and also, boy, if I'm cutting something for this, I'm sorry, I'm cutting Audra entirely. Well, the hair, the fucking ponytail is a crime. There's no really question about that. I had forgotten about it when he first showed up. I'm like, okay, and then as soon as you turn and catch a glimpse of that, I'm like, oh no, why? But I'm saying, ditch everything with Audra. You don't have the time, and she's not very well developed in the book either.
No.
But she really is. I do like the way they completely sideline Bev's. I don't think she's not even her husband. Yeah, Tom. It's just to the point where also I would say then you could probably just cut all of that anyway. But at least if you're going to do it, they were just like, no, she just is like, hey, man, fuck you. I'm out of here. And you're like, okay, that's great. Rather than in the book. Doesn't he follow her in the book? And
he
God
like,
damn it.
They get in a huge physical altercation. She drives away. She calls her like best friend and is like, you know, I'm not going to tell you where I'm or I don't know. But Tom finds her friend and beats the shit out of her until she tells him where Bev has gone. And he follows her to Derry. And then it is like, hey, Henry Bowers is dead. I need you to run some errands for me. That's right,
yeah. I mean, he ends up being like a lot of King bad guys, where it's like, this guy is trash, and he will be then the instrument of evil.
Yeah, and then he literally just, as soon as he drops Audra off at its lair, he just drops dead from shock. Essentially. That's
right, because she goes comatose. He sort of uses them to be like the unknowable evil that affects them. He drops dead. She goes into her coma, which, oh God, I can't believe they put her on the bike in the miniseries. I'm like, good God. They're doing it. I hadn't seen this in so long. I forgot it was in there. It's so dumb. It's so dumb in the book, but it's way dumber when you're actually seeing actors do it.
Yeah, on paper, you ride your bike so fast that your wife comes out of a coma is dumb.
Yeah.
But then you see it and you're like, oh no, that's actually really, really dumb.
And you have two very good veteran actors doing their fucking best to try to sell that, but Jesus Christ, it's bad. Yeah, all this, and you have that one scene where you have Bill's agent or whatever going, Audra, you've got to talk to him, and I'm just going why is any of this in here? Who cares?
Yeah, that the complete sidelining of all of the like adult tertiary characters in the new movies was incredibly smart.
So
Like I said
smart.
earlier, like the even finer strip sanding
Yeah.
between this and the
Because
new one.
I get once it's another thing where it's like so much of King, it's like, because he's very on the surface about a lot of it, which is not to say he's not, of course, a brilliant writer and a lot of stuff, but there is stuff like with Tom where it's like, I get it, it's a cycle of abuse. Her father abused her, she marries an abusive guy or whatever.
She could also have not done that, King.
She could also have not done
Did
that,
you think about
but
that?
it's sort of a thing where it's like, if you're gonna do that, you gotta put a lot more weight into it. And also, the one scene with him in this, and I think this definitely comes from being a 2023 audience, but you're just like, this is pretty cartoonish depiction of abuse. He's so like, it's really like stage play, backhand slap across the room, and you're like, I feel like spousal abuse is probably more subtle than this. I mean, certainly it can take on many forms, as we know, but it just feels so grand and just like, you bitch.
Yeah,
okay.
it is very. It's a very soap opera.
Yeah.
Depiction of domestic violence,
And because it also, while I applaud them for just getting out of the storyline, because they have to condense it all into like 2 scenes, that further, it also doesn't help that I'm watching the new season of Fargo is all about escaping an abusive relationship, and it's so calculated and deep, and John Hamm is so unsettling as this abuser, and you're like, oh yeah, look, yeah, like, because we have listened to people's accounts of it, and we're thinking about the psychological effects of it, and
yes, that's true. That's true.
I think that's what got me about this. I was just like, oh, I'm not even like shocked by this. I'm just more like, oh, that's kind of insane the way he just hit her. Like,
Yeah, and
you feel like if abuse like that was happening, everyone would just be like, oh, that guy beat his wife, go arrest him. I just saw her fly across the room.
yeah,
Um,
he did a very comical snap of his leather belt.
Yes. Oh, that's the thing too, where it's like, oh, we're now entering abuse. I hit you on the ground. Now I go and get my belt. It's just like, here we go. We're doing all abuse all in one moment. It's not. There's no microaggressions to it. There's no levels of anything. It's all just like, the abuse has started. Now you shall be abused.
Start the timer.
Yeah. Here we go. Yeah. It's just going like, okay, maybe all of this could get tossed. That's the thing. We were just talking beforehand about you had to watch this all in one go. I watched this like it aired, one part one night, and I was so struck by how fucking good part 1 is. I mean, and that is generally everybody, but I was going like, holy shit, 1990, this thing holds up. This is really compelling and well done. And then I was watching chapter 2, I'm like, oh right, yeah, no, this part's not as good, is it?
Yeah. The other so I did have a break. I had a bit of an intermission. But I also, the thing about, so I watched it on Jeff's terrible app.
Yes.
Because you can't really find it anywhere else.
No, I bought the Blu-ray of it a while back, but it's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't stream anywhere, which is a bummer.
Yeah. But so the thing about how it exists currently is that it's all just a big 3-hour.
Yeah, that's how it is on the
chunk.
Blu-ray too. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I mean,
there's no there's no like official delineation that you can, that like nobody tells you in the description or whatever.
Just
there's
kind of
no
had to feel
sectioning
it
of it into part 1 and part 2. So I just had to kind of guess. I was like about at the halfway mark, and I had to go have dinner with my parents.
There's
and I was like, all right, I'm pretty sure this is where part 2 starts.
There are still the fades to commercial, and so there is sort of a like,
yes,
it is defeated, and then I think part 1 kind of ends on a like, and we all have to get back together again. Everybody's on their way to Derry or whatever.
Yeah.
Or I guess they're all back in Derry. Because that's right, they do more of the splitting thing. Because they do, I mean, once again, I do think that part 1 is really well structured. The way we find each of them as an adult, and then go back to that character as a kid, and back like that. And they do all the stuff. You know, I mean, if you're familiar with it, they do all the stuff. You're going like, because once again, I haven't seen it so long. like the stuff with Georgie in the sewer is like, oh wow, this is just exactly it is in the book, and it's pretty much unchanged in the newer movies too, because that just fucking works. I guess that leads us to this. How can we have to talk about Tim Curry?
We have to,
because so much of this works because of Tim Curry, right? Who's not even according to IMDb, he's in it for under 20 minutes total of the 3 hours.
oh my god,
He's actually only on.
and
But,
yeah, just how wow, hashtag iconic.
yeah, I mean that's the thing about it. It is, and they talked a lot about other people who were considered. They were very close to hiring Harvey Fierstein to be Pennywise, which would have been a lot different.
Been very different.
I love Harvey Fierstein, but
I do too. There are no things I have seen Harvey Fierstein in that are not comedies.
no, you can't. I can't even imagine. Even in a comedic sense, I can't really imagine him ever being a threat of any. I mean, Harvey Fierstein. He's just so.
Yeah.
He's so iconic unto himself as an entity. Whether that be in stage or screen. That I can't imagine that. So the other people considered Malcolm McDowell. Villain du jour of the time, certainly that would have made sense. And I think this guy wanted it more than they considered him. Alice Cooper. That feels more like he was calling them, right? Like, because he's famously a big horror fan and stuff like that, and just going like, yeah, we get. He's probably like, I've already got the makeup, man. I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
But no, they did talk about in the documentary that once Tim Curry came into the conversation, everybody was like, we have to fucking do anything to get Tim Curry.
It's gotta be.
And he was hesitant to take it only because he had done Legend with Ridley Scott.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Where he was in, he plays basically the devil. I think the character's name is
basically the devil.
I think his character's name is Darkness Titan, but yeah, he's in Giant, and he talked about he hated every second of being in those prosthetics because he's covered head to toe in that movie.
Yeah,
it is,
that's hours, and that's hours of work getting into it, and then like, wow, it's on. We gotta stay. You just gotta stay in it.
They talked. He's all over the documentary, and Curry was talking about when he did Legend. He said at the end of the day, he goes, they would put me in a bath, and they'd peel open the head of the thing and just pour solvent in to take off. And he just goes, he goes, that just fucking haunts me to this day. So nice to see Tim Curry in the documentary and see that he's come a long way from his stroke. He was speaking very clearly, still wheelchair bound, but he was speaking quite clearly, which I was not, because it's one of those horribly tragic things that a guy who's that amazing a performer and singer would lose his voice and mobility. And it's just not fair. But he was very eloquent and very funny because he's such a cheeky, witty. But so basically what they talked about is the entire process of making this was them starting from a lot of prosthetics and then just backing off and off and off and off and off. And apparently what he said that they said to him is he's just like, you don't have to make me scary. I'll make Pennywise scary. Yeah. And it's true. And I think that is, and you look at it, it's pretty minimal. It's a headpiece and then clown makeup is about it.
And sometimes the fake teeth.
Yes. Which he did talk about. He left in between takes because he liked to scare the kids if they ever came up near him. All the kids said it was always like Tim was like over there. He didn't hang out with them. He was over there, and if you went near him, he'd be like, "Argh!"
That's funny.
Yeah. But he talked about just having the best time ever doing it, and you can feel that, and that's what you need in Pennywise, right? Like Pennywise is, and I think even more so than Skarsgård's Pennywise is a whole other entity, which is smart and brilliant in its own right, and very good not to go, because this is so iconic, to go a different route. But the thing I like about this Pennywise is, and this is something Tommy Lee Wallace was very cute, is like he's a clown. He's being funny. And the more he acts like he's doing jokes, the scarier he actually is.
Yeah, I do really I think the one bit There might be another one, but the one bit I can remember from the adult part that does work for me in terms of like maybe not horror, but definitely anxiety inducing is when Richie's in the library and
Yes.
Pennywise is just shouting dumb jokes and
Yep.
doing the noisemaker, and Richie is like yelling at this librarian because he like can't think
Yeah.
and he like can't hear, and it's like, oh my god, nobody else can hear or see this, but like I
Yeah, I thought the
that
same
worked
thing.
for me.
That's it.
Mostly because I have a fucking anxiety disorder, and I'm like, me too, bro.
The-
But yeah.
we'll talk about Harry Anderson in a second. I think he's fucking great as adult Richie. Yeah, that whole scene and the way he's doing, like, do you have Prince Albert in a can? He's being
What about?
yeah, and he's being, and there's a couple other. There are a couple moments here and there where he's doing like clown voices and movements, and he does a laugh. I think is he in front? Is that when he's in front of Bev's house maybe? And he does this like
Yep.
and you're just like, oh fuck, that is the actual more he acts like a children's clown. The whole, I mean, they have on-set footage of him filming the inserts for when he's in the picture that comes to life, and he's in front of the camera, and he's just Tommy Lee Wallace just like, yeah, just more of that, Tim. More. It's clearly just they just let him do whatever. Everybody speaks well of Tommy Lee Wallace in that he got out of everyone's way, which I'm like. That, you know, there are pros and cons to that. I mean, I think I've seen everything Tommy Lee Wallace has directed, which is not much. The guy's not a great director, but at least in this case, they had a good cast, and he knew to just be like, they're gonna pretty much take care of a lot of it.
Yeah. Being too hands off can come with its own pitfalls.
I think that serves him poorly in some other places. Here, he had really good material. And Tim Curry just fucking, I mean, obviously the network talks about like, oh yeah, like Rocky Horror Picture Show was obviously, of course, of car. It's like it doesn't just take that and make it more sinister, and I guess less sexual.
Yeah.
But not sexual.
Not. I mean, listen. Ben does get to make out with Pennywise.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. This is true. So yeah, Curry is like I said, for how little he's in it, and they talk about. I think they're in the documentary. Their diagnosis is, and this is something Muschietti directly makes a point of, is in the end of the movie, Pennywise has been such a force that when he turns into the spider, regardless of the spider being disappointing, it is also just like, oh, well, Pennywise went away, and he's the villain I want to see. Right? Like it is. So I think that's kind of true. Where it just sort of like it's like anything. It's a running problem in a lot of comic book movies too, right? Where it's like, and now they turn into a CGI creature, and all of a sudden that villain who I was really engaged with is now just a thing, and you're like, yeah, not as interesting. And so I do think, yeah, that's probably right. And the kids get to actually throw down with Pennywise, and that is much more effective. The ending of that is so much more effective.
Then the shadow of a bunch of adults tearing apart a like sculpted creature thing.
Yeah, I mean, and like that's the thing where they go like, we worked really hard on that animatronic. Like, I don't think the animatronic is bad. That's not the problem.
No,
it's actually
that's not the yeah, no.
Actually, that's one thing that struck me about this as well is the special effects. They don't overdo them, so it doesn't feel that. There's a couple shots. But one of the things I will also put on Tommy Lee Wallace, he does a lot of stuff practically and is pretty minimalist in a lot of it. So it doesn't have the dated feeling of some other 90s special effects heavy stuff.
Yeah, like I will say the bit there's a bit that's a little fucking Jason and the Argonauts. It hasn't really aged well, but yeah, like most of it's pretty good.
I was really, particularly part one, once again, where I'm just going like, wow, I was expecting this to be more like, oh God, well, they were doing their best. But you're like, no, this is all pretty well done. And like, you were talking about that shower scene, and they talked to the actor in that, who plays Eddie, Adam Frazil, and he was talking about, he goes like, dude, that was all real. He goes, so you got Curry. They had Curry on speakers because he wasn't actually there and set doing the Pennywise lines. and you've got puppeteers with the water coming out of there, and I'm in alone in this shower set that they built. He goes like, that didn't require much acting. It was pretty unsettling. And you're like, yeah, that works. And same thing with Emily Perkins talking about doing the scene with Bev and the sink. She goes like, I didn't want to go anywhere near a drain. I couldn't take a shower after that because that was all practical and real and set up. And it was really unsettling as like a 12-year-old to be like, oh God. So I think,
and the adults not seeing the blood and like interacting with the world, oh, that works so well.
I loved that. Because the obvious thing would be suddenly they look and it's all gone. It's like, no, it's still there and it's getting on them. You see that when Bill is looking at the photographs of Georgie as well, and it starts to make you go like, wait a minute, are they seeing this and then ignoring it? It's like, oh no, it's like it is there. They just can't see it, and that is such a great visual thing to get at what King is talking about. Was like, no, it has to be kids. And even when they confront as adults, they have to return to their childhood to confront it. And you're like, man, that is where the whatever shit I can give the book for being there is a core thing that is why people respond to it so well.
Yeah, I mean, right? Yeah, that it's a bummer. If I had $1 million, I would go and edit it because nobody could do it when it came out. I'll go.
That's
edit
the
it.
I love on Just King things where they talk about King goes, no, King is like, we cut stuff out. It's like, well, you should have kept going. Like,
you should have kept. It's like they cut out like 50 pages of stuff. You know what? They shouldn't have stopped there.
Yeah, you could cut out probably 400 pages and it would be better. You know, it's like there's a lot that could go because that is the thing about it, and that's why. I don't return to the book, but I do. I really like those newer movies, and I do, in some ways, think like they're kind of a purer experience. And which I know is like people in movies based on books are always like blasphemy, the book, and you're just like, I don't know, man. In some ways, with King, because he can get up his own ass about stuff.
He can go on.
He does go on. It's so interesting. He's such an interesting writer because, and I think we've talked about this maybe before, but like he does go on, but he's also a real master of the short fiction.
It's so there's a sweet spot. It's somewhere between like 50 pages and like the 250.
Yeah. Because he's like one of the few big name marquee authors who still writes a lot of short fiction. Like there aren't a ton of people, and particularly we talked about whatever a novella is, but he's one of the only people I know who regularly writes like basically short form novels. And there's some of my favorite stuff of his. I've loved all the like pulpy hard case crime books that he's done. When you're like, God, this guy at like 160 pages writing like pulp crime fiction with supernatural elements is really, really good at it. Because I think at his core, he's sort of a high-minded pulp author, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, right. And I think in some interviews about this book, like at the time of its release or just before, like, he talks about like, I guess I'm primarily a horror author, but like, I wouldn't say that about myself.
Yeah.
I just write shit. And again, because this is an interview, I wish I was doing it right now.
Always, man. You can always go. He's just like, can I just get at a keyboard real quick over here? Hold on. I just had another idea. I mean, that's like when he talks about creating it in that documentary. He's like, oh, I dropped my wife off somewhere and then I went on a walk and I crossed a bridge and I just thought, what if there was a thing that grabbed me into the bridge and then it spiraled into it? And you're just like, oh yeah, this guy.
1,000 pages about it.
Yeah, that's an example. Because it does feel that way, particularly now. He's so prolific that it is like, he's just like, I don't know, bump bad. There's another novel, folks. What do you think? Which I
actually don't answer that because I don't give a shit.
Doesn't matter. I do have a certain respect for the prolific artists like him, where it is just like it is the creation of the work that is the art form, as opposed to laboring over a singular work. Mm-hmm. That's its own thing.
I do wish that it is a skill I wish I had, definitely. I
Sure.
wish that, because I, like King, am always doing something instead of making art, and I always want to actually just be making art.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, unlike King, I don't have the like, and then I do a bunch of
No,
it.
that's 100% was
Unfortunately.
the thing. I remember that I talked to a lot of people, and I had this experience definitely during the early days of the pandemic when I was like, oh man, this would be great. I can write. I didn't write shit. Like, it's just, suddenly it was just like I had all the free time. I'm like, where did that go? What did I produce in
Yeah.
that? Nothing. And yeah, there is something about that. He is, and I mean, of course, we've talked about his book on writing is fucking amazing. That anyone who's a creative of any kind really should read. And you do get he is so regimented and dogmatic in that. Who did I hear talking about that? They go like, the man claims he has writer's block sometimes or whatever. It's like bullshit. Not at least not whatever he. I think somebody was saying like whatever he thinks is writer's block.
Yeah, like his his block is me actually working on something.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
That's where we are. That's
yeah,
where those levels are.
yeah. I'm more in the.
My writer's block would be if like Stephen King dead.
I'm more in the camp of. I remember hearing Aaron Sorkin talk about. He goes, me writing might look to the outside world like me watching ESPN, and I'm like, this is more the kind of writer I am, where it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
no, it's percolating. I'm thinking about
I'm
it.
just thinking real hard
Yeah,
about it.
it's still in there. Let's see. Oh, I mentioned we haven't talked about all the kids yet, so I do want to talk about.
Yeah.
I mentioned Adam Friesel, who plays
Baby Eddie.
Eddie, such a good. And they talk about when they found this kid, they were initially like, I don't know, does he look too young? It's like, but that really works for Eddie, the physicality of it. He also doesn't feel in that way that you were talking about with Jonathan Brandis's Bill. He doesn't feel like a TV kid. He feels like the kid that lives next door to you. I think most of the kids do. I think that's why Brandis stands out. Is you're like,
Yeah.
he's a TV
He was
kid.
a lot older too when they were filming this.
Yeah.
I think is maybe part of it.
Yeah. I think that might have been part of it because he was, let's see, when they were filming it. Yeah, he would have been like 14, whereas everybody else was more like 12, 13. And even though it's only a year, that's a big difference, of course. At that.
It's a big difference, like even like at that time. Like he's definitely like in the throes of going through puberty.
Yeah.
So like
and like actually
it does feel like he's trying to play younger and it's not exactly coming across.
What's interesting though is like Seth Green is the same age, but Seth Green has always seemed like he was in high, like he's always seemed younger. Because it's a few years later, he's on Buffy and he's probably in his 20s, and you're like, yeah, that's Seth Green.
He just looks like a little guy.
He still looks like he's only about 25, even though he's in his 40s. He's just always got that. He's little, and boy, I do love that guy. Because talk about the other nerd, and talk about he's like, well, I'd read all of Stephen King's books, and he goes, I tried to play it real cool around Tim Curry, and he goes, then one day he goes, I was riding in the van with him to set, and I had a Rocky Horror Picture Show shirt on. He goes, I was trying to cover it up, and Tim Curry's just like, oh, you got a Rocky Horror Show, and he's just like, and he's just, all of a sudden he just gave us like, yeah, dude, I'm like real into your work, and I was just like, oh, you're the best, and I'm just like, oh man, yeah, it sounds like Seth Green, and makes sense then. Also, then the other nerd was I guess it's not the same, of course. But John Ritter was the other fucking nerd and a half on it. So, but no, I thought Eddie is great at being the sickly little kid, and then mirrored by Dennis Christopher, really so good at being. He always played kind of strange characters. Mm-hmm. And I think even Dennis Christopher talks about this in the documentary. He just goes like, "Yeah, they sort of called me up and was like, do you want to come do your thing?" You play like weirdos, right? And like outcasts and strange, but like, of course, Eddie also is the one who gets the big moment ultimately to stand up. And it was also it was Dennis Christopher's idea about the thing that he's a virgin.
Interesting. Yeah, Eddie Kasprak, Demi Ace King.
Mm-hmm.
We love that for him.
I know. I actually thought about that. I go like, holy shit. In some ways, for 1990, this is more progressive than if he had said he was gay.
Yeah.
I'm like, man,
Well, and it's interesting too in terms of adapting things from like adapting the book. It is really interesting here that instead of the guy marries his mother,
right,
they went with he just still lives with her, which I think is
100%.
I think is a better like approach to that. And also the other thing is that we don't get the kind of like the only fat phobia we get is for Ben, but I suppose that's necessary because of his function in the story. But we don't get the like Eddie's mom like just virulent fat phobia, which I also think is a good choice. I don't think that's what they were like. I don't think that's why they didn't do it, but I think it was a good choice.
Yeah, it was. I also really liked. I think the Eddie Kaspbrak of the movie, of this movie in particular, is much more grounded in a way, like where it is like, oh yeah, the idea that he just married his mother is, once again, that takes it into like a cartoonish sort of very plotty novelistic thing, like fiction.
Yeah, like almost unsympathetic too.
Right. Whereas here it's just like, oh no, it's more of a like he's sort of frozen in this thing. And of course there's the whole Munchausen by proxy aspect of it, right? Which they do get into with the pharmacist and going like, you don't actually need the inhaler. And yeah, all of that stuff. He's actually, in a weird way, even though of course it's a shorter, more condensed thing, he actually feels more psychologically realized in this. And I think a lot of that also has to do with the performances of both the young and older Eddie Kaspbrak. He really stands out in this. It's interesting you brought up a thing about fat phobic because Brandon Crane, who plays young Ben, talked about this was, and he was a kid actor who was in a bunch of stuff. I remember him distinctly from the Wonder Years, where he was Doug Porter, and he was just one of those TV kids. But he talked about this was the first script that ever came to him where the character was fat, but it wasn't the entirety of a joke about like, oh, better hide the Twinkies. Because he'd been doing a lot of sitcoms where it's like, because it is interesting. Yeah, I think you've got to put it into context of 1990 for that too.
Yeah, and that's a thing that has always like in the back of my mind with stuff like this is like, fuck, how does that make you feel as a kid when you're like get a script and it's like, oh yeah, we sent this to you because it's a fat kid, and it's like, oh okay. Yeah.
He talked about that.
And I guess it depends. It depends on the content of it. Like because being fat is not a bad thing. Like to me and you, like culturally is is the thing that makes it fucked up.
It's getting better, maybe. Kind of.
Yeah.
I think it's moving, like a lot of stuff. I think it's moving in the right direction very slowly. But yeah, no, there's. But I think that's interesting that he talked about like it was more than being the fat kid. I think is what he meant about the It script, of course, right? Yeah. And he was just going, but he talked about he really fought the scene where he has to pour. When he's like, oh, I'm nervous and I'm gonna eat these sugar babies, and he was really like, I don't want to do that. And the director was like, no, but it's really about and he said Tommy Lee Wallace did a good job of going like, this is like a nervous anxiety thing. It's not about, oh, lock up the candy, the fat kid's in town. And so I think, but it's just, you do think about that, what that would have done, because he was mostly doing sitcoms where it was like, here comes, Ricky Schroeder's fat friend on Silver Spoons or whatever, God. I can't even imagine. Yeah, being like, just because he's just one of those kids who was like a husky kid. Like you see him now, and like in the documentary, he's like a bigger dude, but is not. I don't think anyone would call him a fat guy now. But he was just like, some kids are just kind of husky, and that was just his look. And so it was just like, great. Oh, we got a ton of fat kid parts for this kid. It's too bad. And he does have a cameo in the second Muschietti movie.
Oh, I missed that. Dang it.
Yeah, I'll have to look for that when we watch it again for this, because I also did not see it, but I see that on his IMDb here. And he became very good friends with Jonathan Brandis, he talked about. Because unfortunately, Jonathan Brandis
also gone too soon.
Very soon. And he talked about that really fucked him up. That was like his boy. So, too bad there. But who else? Oh, let's talk about Mike Hanlon, who, we always got to get to this in King stuff because, and they spend a lot, I think just King Things always does a great job of covering this about King, is like, King is a liberal guy who means really well. I think he truly, I don't think he's a racist person. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't racist stereotypes and cultural things in his depictions of characters. But I don't think that's certainly not his intention, and he vehemently will fight back on that, of course. Because in his mind, he's like, what are you fucking talking about?
Yeah. Well, it's like, he is racist in the way that a lot of white liberal people are racist. It's like they do not see the things that they think as being racist.
Right.
And will often push back on
and I think because
pointing out because
I think people think immediately, and I've had this with, my parents and stuff like that, right? That it's like, they're not racist because they go like, well, I don't hate people go like, well, doesn't that mean I have hatred or something?
Yes.
And it's like, that's not what it is. It is things like stereotyping or just othering, right? Like,
yes,
so much of Mike Hanlon's character in the book is just like, he's black. And once again, King is going, and look at how tough it is to be black, which is true, but I really, if there's a Just King Things you really should listen to, it's the It one.
Yeah.
Because they have the whole thing where they read from like the newsletter where the woman wrote in about like, it's like, no, it's your representation. You're on the right track or whatever, but all he experiences is racism.
Yeah.
And it's like, I get that you're saying that's bad, but you're going so far the other way that you're making the entire experience of being black being the victim of racism.
Yeah. And not only that, but King cannot seem to imagine a gotta be so careful.
Yeah.
King cannot seem to imagine a successful outcome for, like, I guess specifically Mike Hanlon.
Yeah. Well, because Mike Hanlon's different than when we talked about like Dick Halloran or Mother Abigail, of course, in The Stand is the ultimate example of those are the magical elderly black people, which is a totally different stereotype. And as we've talked about, I think actually Halloran is one of the better examples of that in his work. And Hanlon's a different case though, where it's just like, and like I said, I can totally see where he's being like, no, look at this. It's about this guy has to fight every day. This fucking, thing that they're calling him the N-word. And you're just like, Jesus, though.
But it becomes but that becomes disingenuous specifically in this work. And I think in Drawing of the Three a little bit too, but we're not talking about the Dark Tower. So
that's its own whole thing.
Its own whole thing.
Yeah.
But specifically for Mike Hanlon, that becomes disingenuous because the grown-up versions of these kids who are all kind of socially othered in their own ways.
Right. I mean, they are the losers club, titularly.
They are
right?
the losers club.
Yeah.
While they have issues in their adult lives, Beverly, and again, right, this is not to diminish any of the problems that they have. Like, Ben is clearly like a depressed alcoholic. Beverly is dealing with domestic violence. Ben has, an estranged wife. I think she's cheating. I think the subtext is she's cheating on him. But anyway.
Yeah, I think that's, once again, though, she's so limited in her presentation on this that I'm like, I think you're right.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
But Beverly is also a highly successful fashion designer
Right.
Ben is a highly successful architect.
I mean, literally, when we meet him in this miniseries, he's coming back in a limo from winning a prestigious award.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill is Stephen King, so he's a highly successful writer.
I couldn't tell in this. Is he meant to be a screenwriter specifically in this, or is he a novelist
no, I think he's
adapting
just
himself?
on an adaptation of his book.
That's the thing. Yeah. So he's
Yeah.
he's even more Stephen King.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then in the book, Eddie is like a very successful like limousine. Like he drives around those movie stars.
Right.
And Stan and
there's one brief scene that establishes that in the miniseries.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we've done the thing. We forgot about Stan.
But
Stan is
that's
an
Stephen
accountant,
King's fault.
and there's
Yes.
the whole issue of him being Jewish and growing up to be an accountant. Like Steve, really? Okay, great. But
actually, the miniseries ditches a lot of that, which is good. I mean, Stan is further. He's. I mean, I would say like they do the best they can with Stan in this. They really do.
Yeah. And Richie is very successful. Like, right, all of these characters, despite the issues they have, like as adults, are at their baseline very successful.
Yeah.
And Mike stayed in Derry to be a librarian.
Yeah.
And just keep the lights on.
Right.
So like that becomes a disingenuous thing about like, you know, these characters are good and cool, but it's like, okay, but all of the white kids, the white kids and the Jewish kid, like they all grew up to become very successful, but like why was it Mike who we like did not have the imagination to have a successful adult life?
Right. You could have still kept him as the keeper of the lore or whatever, but you know, there's something else to, I don't know, he's a historian or something, as opposed to just the dairy librarian, you know?
Yeah.
It is, I mean, but it's another thing where I can almost feel like King's thing. It's like, no, but he's important. He's the smart one. He's the one who knows everything. Until Bill,
Mike Hanlon grows up into being the magical black person.
It's kind of true, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's the one who's just, I gotta put the band back together.
Yeah.
Which is why I said that's fine, but it's just could it have been more than that?
Sidelined too.
Yes, he is sidelined.
He does not get to participate in the final confrontation,
which is not good.
No, that was also a change. I'm pretty sure in the new movies, all of them except Stan are part of the
I believe that is correct, as it should be, because it just it makes you go like, why is he even here then? If he's not gonna, if he's just like, here's all the information you guys need. Bye.
Yeah. Again.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is. Yeah. Fucking carte blanche, the fucking magical black person.
Yeah,
trope.
It's true, and I just think it's one of those things where it's like, I don't think King sees that he's doing it. Like I feel like because I know, and then once again, it's always just like, but I'm not racist, so because then that's an invalid criticism.
Because he'll do it like I think 3 or 4 more times after it, like in terms of the book.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, but I think this is another thing where I think because they have, particularly Tim Reed is older. Mike, he's really good, and it actually is a bummer then that he's sidelined, because I actually think he brings a lot of gravitas to this. And like when he's established, he gets the starting thing where he's at the crime scene and he's like, oh my god, it's happening again. And for a split, because I forgot this, when he was at the crime scene, I'm like, oh, did they make him like the sheriff? That would be kind of cool if he was like, you know, when he rolls, and because he goes up to an officer, he's like, what's going on here? And I thought, wait, did I forget? And he's like, God, oh no, he's still just the librarian. Because even the guy's like, get out of here before the chief gets here. You're just a librarian. I'm like,
I know.
Shit. Like, I thought he was going to have an important or cool thing where he's like a detective or something. No.
Yeah.
No. But yeah, and Tim Reed, one of the things is they were really smart in this miniseries. They got TV people, but they got like top level TV people, like big. These were the A-lister, because all these people came from successful shows. Ritter was on Three's Company. Tim Reed was on WKRP in Cincinnati. Richard Thomas was on The Waltons. Harry Anderson's on Nike. We got to talk about Harry Anderson. Let's get to Richie Tozier, because we talked a little bit about Seth Green, who is just. I mean, Richie's my favorite because I feel like he's the one I relate to the most. He's the funny kid who does voices. I'm like, oh man, I'm a Richie Tozier. Even reading the book, I was just like, okay, yeah. I feel seen. He's the one who grows up to be, in the book, he grows up to be a radio DJ. In this, he grows up to be a comedian. And one of the smart things is, and this is true about the Muschietti movies too, they fucking cast an actual real deal comedian. And they talked about he was given a lot of free reign to improvise most of everything, Harry Anderson.
Oh, okay. Shit.
Yeah, they talk about like pretty much all of the jokes. And then they also talk about Tony Wallace goes, the fucking adults were harder to corral than the kids. Because they talk about then giving him free reign to do that was Harry Anderson's just like, now I'm gonna break everybody up. My goal is to ruin takes with my jokes.
Oh, what a dick. I love that.
Yeah, Harry Anderson was the best, man. And but also really a real deal good dramatic actor, too. Like you talk about, that scene with Pennywise in the library is such, especially from 1990s network TV, I don't expect a very grounded portrayal of somebody having like a panic attack like that.
Yeah.
And that he is always the one who is like, guys, I can't fucking do this. And him constantly vomiting out of like fear and stress. Really good stuff. I really got to say both. And this making the funny kid covering up being the most neurotic in a lot of ways, even though, seemingly like Kasparak is the sick one, and less so, once again, I think there's less of the Jewish stereotype in this Stan than the huge ball of neuroses that he is in the book.
Yeah, really the only indicator of Stan being Jewish is when he's introduced and Richie's like, this is Stan, he's a Jew.
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
Which I'm like, I guess that would be the only way I can possibly.
Is it better? I don't think it's better.
Yeah, the only thing I can possibly go is like, okay, because I guess in the 1950s maybe that was a bigger deal. Like that would be like, as a kid you would go like, he's a Jew. Yeah, and Bev's a girl and Mike's black, and it's like, but yeah, I don't know. Well, they pretty much just sideline Stan, which he's mostly sidelined in the book. The miniseries just completes that almost to the point of could you cut him, except for the impact of him killing himself, right? That's the thing, and that is good dramatic device, that there's one kid who is consumed by the fear of it.
Yeah.
And the bloody on the wall. It ends up being the Jewish kid.
It ends up being the Jewish kid.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, and again, right? It's like, okay, it's like he just doesn't see there. It's like he did it, but then like it's nebulous, there's a gray fog, a mist rolling in.
That's the thing is always
about the consequences.
I think that's the thing about King, where it's always like, no, you guys, and I think this is true about a lot of stuff, because I like a lot of like older stuff, pieces of art. It always is that sort of thing. It's like, look, we say this loving Stephen King. We're not like, what a fucking monster. But it is just like, you can't be ignored. I don't know what to tell you. It's clearly a blind spot. Like I said, I don't think he's out to go like, this will show, this Jewish person. But it's more just like, oh God, he can't see it, can he? And even when it's pointed out to him, because that's clear. Because even when it's pointed out to him, he's like, oh, no.
Come on.
Yeah, and I think that is
it's very like, the relationship I have with Stephen King, and he would push back on this because he's like, I'm not your Uncle Steve.
Yeah.
But like, the relationship I have with this author is he is kind of like this uncle I thought was super cool when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I grow up and I'm like, wow, it's my cool Uncle Steve.
Yeah.
And he's like saying weird shit. And I'm like, no, wait. you can be better than this. And he's
Right.
like, no, I don't think I can actually.
Right, because
So it's sad, right? Like
it
it's
is
just a bummer.
And it is because it's not. You also go like, you don't really think that, do you? Or how do you not? It is. It's out of a love for it, where you just want to be like, yeah, you want him to be better than that. But then you have to go like, right, he is like a man from a waspy part of the country in his 70s. I have to remind myself of that. Like I said, I mean, it is very similar to, once again, I'm not like bagging on my father, but like there are moments where he says stuff, I'm just like, oh, I so radically disagree, despite the fact this person is, such a huge influence on me, of course. I felt the exact same way. I had a distinct feeling about this during that incredibly embarrassing Clint Eastwood thing at the Republican National Convention with the invisible Obama in the chair, and I was like, somebody get Grandpa off the stage, please. Somebody get Grandpa off the stage, because but it's like, it felt like I was at Thanksgiving and your grandfather stands up and does a racist toast. You're like, oh, we gotta put Grandpa in a home. I love him, but this somebody, can't anyone please just go, what are you doing?
This man's still alive.
Yeah, for pure spite.
I mean, God.
Yeah.
I'm gonna die before Clint Eastwood, probably.
That's right. Yeah. And he'll still be directing a movie when you die.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
He'll be filming it at the graveyard where I'm buried.
Well, somebody quiet that funeral down. We're trying to shoot.
Christ.
Let's see. Have we talked about everybody? I think we've talked about. I do like Richard Mauser, who plays adult Stan as basically just the head in that refrigerator, is so crotchety in the documentary, because he's just like, I fucking hate it. They put me in this makeup. They stuck me in that fridge. God damn it. I was like, we don't need another fucking take of this. Get me out of here.
I did it perfect the first time.
Oh,
Fuck off.
Christ. Oh, God damn it. Yeah.
It is pretty good. Like, listen, it is very, I think it's pretty effective.
Yeah, I mean, they really did have, they got a lot of top talent on. This was also, I thought this was an interesting thing. This is one of the first American things to take advantage of the Vancouver tax breaks and stuff. This is one of the first like major American productions shoot in Vancouver, which of course is now just the norm and everything shoots up there pretty much. But they had in the documentary, they have a bunch of like newspaper clippings where it's like, Hollywood comes to Vancouver, John Ritter's in town shooting a Stephen King movie, it's just like, and it's just so exciting. They're like, why? We've spotted the stars in our town, which I thought was great. The other thing that is the most delightful part of the animatronic spider to me is John Ritter doing bits with it and behind the scenes footage of the. He's just like, here boy, down boy. Yeah, it's worth it for that. He's just doing bits, man. That guy just. Yeah, they talked about that, because they said it was very heavy. A lot of the material they were dealing with, they were just talking about like as soon as it was cut, Ritter was doing bits.
I did want to talk about. I think the thing that is not as effectively done in this, that I think is more effectively done in the newer films, is the kind of like tone shifting. I think it's a little too stark in this. Because literally the one that was so evident to me was Richie's adult panic attack at the library.
Yes.
And then hard cut to Mike and Bill just doing weird bike stuff.
God, every time they cued, what is that, like that 50s song that they're playing? It's not.
It's like if your smile's so bright you could have been a star or something.
Yeah, and it's just like ding 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 ding. It's the same thing with the dinner at the Chinese restaurant as well. Yeah, where you're just like, because that scene, that's the one that cut is weird. And it goes on forever too. It goes on forever. That's all. Anytime I go back to, 1990 isn't. It's long ago, but also not that long ago. And it's weird to think about. Like anytime I go back to TV, particularly like the 80s or into the 70s, I'm like, boy, you guys just had all the time in the world to fuck around, didn't you? Like 2-minute opening title sequences and stuff on like old TV shows, and I'm just like, God. And now everything is. Fly. No, and now, because now, like, a network TV show runs like 38 minutes without commercials now. It's insane. But I'm just thinking about, like, God, how much of this bike riding do we need? And then we get another, but the Chinese food restaurant is like, you guys, we all know why we've come back here. And then it's just like, but we don't have to deal with it right now. Let's all have fun. We're having a good time.
Yeah.
The best scene in that, though, is Harry Anderson's as Richie when he comes in and he's like, I can't. And then you watch him put on comedy Richie. And I'm like, dude, that nails who that character is. That is perfect. That's a really good example of them doing something subtle, which they don't always do. But no, I think some of the tonal shifts, are strange in that way. Once again, I think less so when they're kids, because those tonal shifts kind of work when you're a kid. You do sort of feel like, it was scary. Now it's fun. And
I feel like, in the kid portion, or the flashbacks, I suppose, because this is not as hard delineated as the new movie.
It's a little it's more that the kid stuff just runs out in part one.
Yeah.
But it's still going back and forth, and then it's kind of just mostly adult stuff in part two, which I think why people don't like part two as much.
Yeah.
I
think that so this might be part of the kind of like absence of Cohen in part two is that I think that in the kid flashbacks, I think the tonal shifts work a lot better.
Yeah.
Because like there is more of like a gradient from like the eeriness to the like, oh, but we are kids and we're like we're friends and we all love each other.
Yeah.
I think it's just a little too stark in the adult
section. There is that. The other thing to talk about, since you brought up Cohen, I love in the documentary, he goes, God, if I'd gotten to work on part two, I would have written a better ending. I wouldn't have had that fucking spider. I know. He goes, I don't know what I would have done, but there's no way I would have put that fucking spider in there. And it's like, okay, man, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, like I said, I do think we'll talk about Muschietti. I think finds maybe the best way to do something that is true to the movie and gets at what the book is trying to do, at least. But yeah, it's tough. I mean, like I said, and also the other thing I in Tommy Wallace's defense is it did sound like he was writing it while they were making it.
Yeah.
It seemed like it was like...
That can't be easy.
No, it was sort of like, he goes like, I would finish shooting for the day and then go back and write like the next day's pages. And you're just like, good Lord.
Oh, wow. Just like Stephen King.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, the choice... That's an interesting thing about this as well. I don't think King was super involved in this, which has been kind of unusual. Coming off of Pet Sematary, of course, which we did last week, which was very... so King was like the creative force on that. Nobody really talked about King being around or anything on this.
And that will be super interesting as a juxtaposition between that and the Shining miniseries.
Yeah, right. And actually a lot of them, because we're not covering it, but I think he also wrote, he did adapt The Stand.
Yes, he did do that.
He did both Stand miniseries. So because it did feel like a lot of the miniseries were like, okay, the movies are doing their thing, but the miniseries are Stephen King's. And this is interesting because I always remembered this one as being Mick Garris because I just assumed they were all Mick Garris. But this one, of course, is Tommy Lee Wallace. But
Tommy Wallace, yeah.
Pretty much all of the upcoming ones are Mick Garris. Like he becomes and he was really King's guy. It felt like it is like it's just like Tommy or Mick Garris gets the thumbs up from Uncle Stevie on whatever he's up to.
Yeah.
So I do think that's interesting that I couldn't find anything that specifically talked about King ever even being on set of this thing.
Damn, okay.
Yeah.
Who fucking directed The Langoliers? Because that was actually
95.
Yeah. I couldn't remember when that one fell.
Because the other thing,
IMDb, tell me who directed this movie. This UI is useless.
It's Tom Holland.
Okay.
It's Spider-Man.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
No, it's Tom Holland who made one of my.
Damn, Spider-Man.
You know what's interesting
is. Born yet. No, I know.
Tom Holland made Fright Night, one of my favorite movies, and then Tommy Lee Wallace made the far inferior Fright Night Part 2. Yeah, so there you go. Interesting.
There you go.
Yeah.
It all comes back around.
But as you bring that up, is the other thing that this spawns is all of these, right? This thing is such a huge hit that quickly, like, every network is now going, get us a King novel now. We need one now. Are you kidding me? What do we have? You know, and ABC did a bunch, because did ABC? Yeah, ABC also did the Langoliers, which that one is burned into my memory. That one and the one that was, I think we've mentioned Storm of the Century before, and that was an original script, I believe, though. That wasn't actually one of the books, I don't think, was it?
No, it was a pull. It was either a screenplay or like an actual play. I don't 100%
and it got turned into that. And then I remember it got published. The script got published as a book.
Yeah,
that was the thing.
That might have been it.
That was the thing that was weird about it. Storm of the Century. Yeah, it was I think it was an original. I think. The script for the miniseries was written by King expressly for television, and the screenplay was then published as a mass market book.
Yes, that's right.
And so that's so shitty, of course, too. Where they tried to like have that out at the time, where it's like the new King novel, and you're like, it's like when that Harry Potter play came out, and everybody was like, it's like, and then people go like, wait a minute, whoa, this is like a play, and you're like, yeah, it's just a published script of a play, you guys. I don't know why you thought this was the next novel. But they made their money.
You guys never read Shakespeare?
What the hell is this? Yeah, honestly. But that's the other one I remember getting, like, was just bombarded by that. And the Shining miniseries, of course, too, which we're going to talk about in a couple weeks. But this kicks off, I feel like one of the things, looking at this as an IP brand, as we do on the show, this is really like, because there was the Salem's Lot miniseries before this, of course. But this is the sort of becomes what they're trying to get at from here on out. Like, they're all trying to replicate the success of this. Because it just, they talked about this thing got like 30 million viewers, which is crazy.
Like it is sort of a turning point in, because it seems like, no, I think maybe the Dead Zone was the turning point. Because that was the first one that was like, Stephen King's The Dead Zone.
I think that was, and this one, but we talked about that Pet Sematary, which we did last week, was Stephen King's Pet Sematary.
Yeah.
Whereas Carrie and The Shining were just adaptations of hit novels.
Yeah.
It didn't matter that it was this guy yet. And then it becomes that, like I said, something like Storm of the Century, where it's even an original thing, is like, the master of horror writes exclusively for the screen. And you're just like,
then Rose Matter, like 2 years after Storm of the Century.
Yeah, exactly. It's they're. I mean, it becomes pretty consistent at this point, right? Like, all my childhood, like in the 90s, it was, I don't know if it was yearly, but it felt like almost annually you would get a Stephen King miniseries. And for better or worse.
Yeah.
This one's really good. That's the thing. I do think this one did set a high bar. And then The Stand, I think, was pretty well received at the time. And I still like that one. Actually, I like it a lot more now that they made the new one that is much worse. All of a sudden, I'm like, you know what? That 90s one is actually great. But so it's interesting, though, like I said, to talk about this one. And but always... all of these were network TV, which is interesting. I love the guy who plays Henry Bowers. Talks about, they talk to him in the documentary, and he goes like, I just wish we could have gone harder. I just wish we could have taken it to the level of the book. And he also has one of my favorite behind the scenes things on it, where he would apologize profusely before and after every take to the kid playing Mike Hanlon, because he's just like, I'm so sorry I had to say that.
I think the same thing happened with the kid in the new movie too.
Yeah, well, because it's real, and I remember it reminds me of, I saw Topher Grace talking about playing David Duke in BlacKkKlansman, and he talked to Spike Lee about that earlier, and he goes, I don't know how to do this, man. Like, I'm happy to be. And Spike Lee told me, he goes, you've just got to know that you, Topher, are doing a good thing, and that the more you play this realistically, and that's, of course, that movie is made by a black filmmaker and is more expressly about racism, but I mean, that is the thing where it's just like, you are saying terrible words for a good reason because this art is getting at something. And I think that but it's still, I can't imagine using those words to another human being. Like, that's where the reality and fiction of acting breaks down. It's just like, I remember talking to somebody about being in a production of Cabaret where they had to play a Nazi, and he goes, just putting the fucking armband on was like, oh yeah. It's just like, even though I'm like, I know I'm not a Nazi, and I know this is a character and this is all fake, but still, it's just like, that's a thing and it's real and it's ugh. So, I applaud people for being able to do that. I don't know how people in slavery dramas and stuff like that. I just, God, I don't, maybe I'm a lesser actor, but I'm like, I don't think I could do that.
Yeah, I don't know. When they're too good, I start to sigh a little bit, but, that's none of my business.
I think I seem to really lean, and you seem to hit that with the hardest of R's. This year of 1990, we didn't talk about, because we did 1989's Pet Sematary last week. 1990 also sees the release of Misery, which is, I think, easily one of the best King adaptations. And also, Misery. But I also think about like the chore of adapting this versus Misery. Misery is so fucking easy compared to it because it's so contained, and it's so. They did it on Broadway a few years ago. Misery. Ooh, with Bruce Willis and Laurie Metcalf. Yeah, I know. I was like, that would work as a play. Like, I could see that being this really intense single setting, play. Yeah, I would have been curious to have seen that. But I just think that's so interesting. That was at this time. And then Paramount Pictures also put out Graveyard Shift the same year, which I don't think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen Graveyard Shift.
Oh, you should check out Graveyard Shift. It's not great.
Yeah.
But Brad Dourif does play a rat catcher.
Okay, well I do
and
love
that's
Brad
worth
Dourif.
the price of admission alone.
Dourif, the king of the weirdos, man.
Just nothing but respect for my king.
Oh, no question. It's just like, you need a weird little guy, and can go either way. Usually it's nefarious, but I think I love him on Deadwood as the doctor and stuff like that.
Yeah, he's just a funky little dude.
Yeah, no, I just love, that guy. I love, those are always my favorite actors of the weird character. That's why I love like Dennis Christopher in this, who plays Cat. You're just like, you're like a weird little guy. I love it. So those come out, and then also Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, which has one of the stories in it, is adapted from King.
Is that The Raft?
That is The Cat from Hell.
Oh, Cat from Hell. Yeah. I think The Raft is in actually Creepshow too.
Ah, yes, that probably is the case because they're. Oh God, sorry. We'll talk about it when we get to a thing closer to it. But I just happened to see the Mangler listed here, which I'm always.
Oh yeah.
Tobe Hooper's the Mangler.
Love the Mangler.
The Mangler man is crazy. Yeah, because like there's no King cameo in this, is what I'm saying. So this is an interesting one where it's like, it feels like Uncle Stevie got the check and was just like, okay. And I guess we'll get to it now in the show, Uncle Stevie's reaction to this. He's pretty cool with it. I don't know. He doesn't have like extreme feelings about it. Where is it? I had a quote from him about it. That was just like, where he's basically just like, yeah, I know, it's pretty good. I thought they did like a pretty good job. And it's just so, it's always weird when he's such a guy who either heaps praise or hates something. That it's
he's very rarely middle of the road.
It's pretty rare, yeah. He's always talking about this stuff too. He's never like, wow, whatever. It's always like, he's got to have a stance on it. Where was the thing?
A stand, perhaps.
A stand, if you will. Yes.
Stupid. Sorry.
All right. Well, it's just that kind of show. Anyway, I couldn't really find a good quote particularly, but he really loved Curry.
Okay, well that's good. That's good.
Yeah, I really loved Curry. I think he thought all the like casting was good. But interesting. Tommy Lee Wallace said, I don't think we got it. Like, he was just like, he goes, I'm proud of my work on it, but he goes, I don't think we nailed that. He goes, I don't think it really captures the book. And I do think some of that is kind of what the Henry Bowers guy is reacting to a little bit, is like, yeah, it just can't. And I'm not even talking about specifically like graphic imagery per se, but it's just like, yeah, it just can't get as nasty as parts of the book do, and just unpleasant. You're just not going to get that at 8 o'clock on ABC. It's just, yeah, and that's key to this, right? Because it is so much about trauma and dread and because really, like, the best part of the adult part of it to me is the idea that it is the confronting of trauma, right? I mean, because that's always the one level deeper on all the King stuff is going. It's like, yeah, it's this literal thing. Oh, the other thing I want to talk about with this too, though, is with this specifically, is how much, and then the Muschietti movie does this even more, how much it becomes Pennywise as the singular thing, because that's a huge change from the book. Pennywise is one of many forms that it takes on.
Yeah. And it in the novel, like, it does keep some aspects of the clown when it is in its other forms, but not it's more of the closest they get to it in the miniseries is when Ben sees his dad out near the standpipe.
Yeah.
And he, it's like a cut away and then it cuts back and he has the pom-poms.
Yeah.
Like that's more of how it manifests in the book.
Yeah. And you also get the moment where when they're all in the circle together as kids and they're each seeing down a different tunnel, like something or hearing something, and they have to keep them. And that's all really effective stuff in this. But the thing is, in both this and in the feature film adaptations as well, it sort of feels like Pennywise is the default mode.
Yes.
Whereas Pennywise is just one of many forms in the book. Some of which as of course they talk about, some of which they just can't clear, right? Like some of it is a lot of it is IP.
Yeah, like it's interesting how, because the oh my god, wow, get a sentence out, bud. The thing that is interesting about adapting, right? Like, well, that's what the whole thing's about. The interesting thing about adapting that, though, is that it is difficult, one, to clear some of the IP stuff because it is very based in, like, kid fears and pop culture fears. But also, it's hard to have that many different forms and kind of keep that, like, visual like iconography of this is the same thing.
Yeah.
So like being able to focus on one bit of iconography to really like sell that this is one creature doing all of this is like, right? Sort of
because for a singular filmic experience, you want a villain, right? Antagonist or unantagonist. English mother, my English teacher mother is immediately going, "What are you doing?" But she also says I'm
she's
swearing.
Call you. Yeah, she felt that.
Well, she's also probably going, "You're swearing too much." But my mom came and saw me do stand up once, and she was just like, "Well, it's funny, but did you have to curse so much?" I was like, "Okay." But the thing about it is, you want that in a film. It's a different thing. It is. And I think that's even what they're reacting to, is even though they're true to the book when it becomes the spider, I think they're right when people are going like, you still want it to be Pennywise because that's your threat. That's the villain you want to see defeated. Even if the movie is telling you, well, but that's what Pennywise really is. You're like, yeah, but I don't know what that is. That's just a big spider. Who cares? Yeah. It could be anything. Like, that's a henchman at that point. And I think that's a big thing. And I know listeners of all my shows are like, oh, God, here he goes. He's going to talk about Star Trek. But that's a big thing. A lot of Star Trek fans will criticize the movies because they go like, oh, they all have to have a villain. Star Trek doesn't even... But it's like, yeah, but as a movie, you kind of need like a villain for them to fight. It's sort of like the thing. Yeah, the show can get away with God Cloud or whatever, but like, yeah, it's got to be like Idris Elba and prosthetics. It's just going to be the case. And I think that's just the visceral nature of it, right? I mean, that's always particularly in movies, people want to know, anytime they make like comic book movies, like, who's the villain going to be? Anytime they make a Bond movie, who's playing the villain? You want that singular force. And they really luck out, of course, in that they perfectly cast it with one of the greatest actors ever in just I do sort of agree with them. They go like in 1990, I can't think of anybody who could have done this. I mean, that especially that they talk about would have done it for TV, right? Like, because of course, like,
I mean, there was no way they had Malcolm McDowell money.
No, Lord, no. In fact, a couple years later, he will actually be a Star Trek movie villain. So, yes, but like, because I go like maybe like a Robin Williams could have pulled it off. I mean, that would have been, that was like when they were talking about him as the Joker though too. It's like, is that too on the nose?
That would have been so interesting to see, though.
I'm sure he would have loved it.
Oh yeah,
because he every single time they made a Batman movie, he tried to be the villain in it. I think he was always like, I should be the Joker, I should be the Riddler.
The fact that they let Jim Carrey be a villain, they didn't let Robin Williams.
I think that's the one where I'm like, because I have a lot of issues with that Batman movie. But
I sometimes bring it up half to just make you grimace.
Yeah, but I am like, but God, if a more grounded written Riddler played by Robin Williams, because of course he played some great villains late in his career.
Yeah.
And we talked about that when he was briefly talked about for Jack Torrance, and they were Jack Torrance, and they were like, nah, that guy's Mork. And you're like, no, he's a Juilliard trained classically. He's a brilliant actor. But we're still.
But you're right. He was Mork.
But he was Mork. So, yeah, that's.
There's no way Stan would have gone for it.
No, God, no. Kubrick's like, the guy plays an alien on a sitcom. Are you kidding me? Yeah. So this thing really works, but it does. I was surprised at how well part one held up for me. Is my reaction to this. Part two is a disappointment, but I think is still better than it. Like this could have been so much worse, which is I know such a backhanded compliment.
Yeah,
but it really is like this is pretty good. I really applaud the ambition of this 1990 miniseries because it is insane that ABC greenlit it.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of my reactions to stuff, because I of course have a reputation on podcasts for liking too many things. Which is a weird reputation to have, but
weird thing to be critical of.
I know, but a guy used to come on our old comics podcast, Ben Dewey, who's a great comic book artist, talked about, he had a great quote that I use all the time where he says, my metric is earnestness. And that's where I'm like, this is clearly made by people who are doing this with the most sincerity, and that carries through. And I think we're gonna see stuff that isn't that, and that will be the stuff that I react negatively to. But it's like, God, this is as good as it was gonna get for a 1990s television miniseries. That's my reaction to this.
Yeah, I think that you and I are very similar in that way. That like it's very easy for us to find both the faults and the positives of a thing, even if it is very bad. It's very easy. I think we're very similar in that way, that it's like, okay, hear me out.
Yeah.
On the surface, this looks like it stinks, but there's some stuff in here that's really cool to think about.
And that's the thing too, is I do sort of, if something is got enough of that, some of the faults can kind of fade away and not stand out as much to me, and just go like, yeah, but like, I see what they're trying to do, or that was really cool. Yeah, I mean, see most of the episodes you've been on of Meet the Monsters, where Brendan
you and I are just like, okay, but this was really cool, and Brendan is like, I can't believe I'm here.
Brendan is the exact opposite of us in that every time anytime I go see a movie with him, he's always just like, okay, here's what didn't work, and then I'm like, Jesus, man. He's like, no, but I loved it. But it's just like, I just have to start with the 8 things that went wrong, but it was good. But first, let me tell you why it didn't work in these 4 places. And you're like, Jesus, man. And sometimes it's insane stuff, like Dracula has the wrong shaped nose. Stay tuned, Meet the Monsters listeners, for that episode. I won't spoil which one. That might be coming out soon, when an actual Brendan Jones complaint is that's not a Dracula nose. Yeah, he's very specific.
Teehee.
It helps to hang out with a guy like him when I go like, I'm not a nerd at all.
I think I'm a pretty regular guy.
Yeah, actually, that's all right. I can totally talk to people. Well, we talked about I did find the Stephen King quote I was looking for, which is he described this as a very ambitious retelling of a very long book.
Yeah, I just every time I hear a quote from him, I'm just like, I'm either like, Steve,
Yeah.
or it's like, how did you hit me so hard with
Yeah.
4 words? God
That's
damn.
the Shining thing about that's a movie that's set out to hurt people.
Hurt people.
That's the best. Yeah, and just like you're right, that movie does hurt. Whether that's good or bad, but it's a mean movie, no question about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, no, that's yes, ambitious retelling of a very long book.
I like that he describes his own book as very long. Because that is one of the first things I think about when I think about it is, very long. And once again, unlike some of his other longer ones, really doesn't need to be. This doesn't need to be one of the 1,000-page ones.
No.
Like I said, you can get into how effective or how much the stand lands with you on an individual level, but like that is designed to be an epic from the ground up.
Yeah, I mean it's literally his Lord of the Rings,
right?
So.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the thing about that makes sense that's a 1,000-pager. This is always the one that of the 2 like 1,000-page King novels. Oh, and the 3, of course, we talk about Under the Dome, but even Under the Dome also makes more sense because it is a sprawling story of the entire town, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this
could have gotten away. He could have easily gotten, and I don't know if he was in the headspace at the time to think about this, but this could have easily gotten away with being the core story of these kids, and then there could have been like some kind of comkompendium or like
in that Lord of the Rings way, there could have been a Silmarillion, tie in with the mini series of like, oh, here's like the chapter where it talks about how much it hates these kids, and here's all this stuff of Mike interviewing people about dairy. I mean, like a lot of his stuff, right? Where it's like this could be like where he has short stories set in this world and stuff like that, because he keeps like Jerusalem's Lot and stuff like that, where he keeps coming back to the different pieces of it. Now, as we speak, and I'm sure they're literally working on it as we speak, Max is developing a dairy origin show.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if that will kind of be the filmic version of my very good idea that I should go back to, the 80s and tell Steve about.
Yeah.
Because, right, the thing about adapting that we've talked about this story is that you can't really do the whole thing. You have to find the core story and just tell that.
Yeah. There it is. Welcome to Dairy is the name of the show.
Yeah.
And that will be on sometime in 2024 on Max.
Wahoo.
We may have to record something about that, do some kind of bonus feature or something about that, because I'm very curious about that. And of course,
I'll probably watch it.
Oh, for sure, man. I mean, I'll at least watch the first episode. Because and they're also talking about doing the Overlook show as well. Mm-hmm. Which
that could be interesting.
Oh, well, because the Overlook, a lot of that is unexplored, and you could do. I would love to see something like an anthology show, because there's all these stories about things that come to the Overlook, that don't have to get bogged down in mythology, but I know probably will. Or do a limited thing like they just did the little 3-part miniseries that's the origin of the Continental in the John Wick franchise. And it's like, great, that was like 3 90-minute specials, and you're like, perfect, and that just leave it at that. It doesn't have to be like a 5-season thing. I am curious about that, but of course we'll get a little taste of that at the end of this season of the show when we get to the Pet Sematary origin movie, which once again still haven't seen, so very curious about that. Let's hear some IMDb user opinions on this.
Yes.
This is our highs and lows segment. I'm going to start with the highs on this one, the high on this one, because I think this is a pretty good, like what I see a lot of people praising this for. I think this perspective is this. So this comes to us from IMDb user Andreas N., who titles the review Stephen King Classic. Okay, the movie is not a masterpiece. Still, it was the first movie that touched something very deep inside of me, and the first movie ever that put tears into my eyes. I was 14 when I saw it for the first time, and it somehow changed my life. It really did. Watching it today makes me aware of how different you watch movies when years go by. I still take this one under my wing as it had such an enormous emotional impact on me personally. I wish I had such friends when I was a kid. Thanks again, Stephen King. Despite the length of the narrative, the plot is straight and at least trying to have as much from the original artwork in it as feasible. The casting is basically okay, though Seth Green as Richard Tozer does not do justice as the character on the novel. Okay, that I would say he's like interesting choice. But the late Jonathan Brandis is brilliant. So the exact opposite of what we just said.
Okay.
Yeah,
all
that's
right.
interesting. But 10 out of 10 stars for that. But I do think that's key. There's so many people who talk about seeing this as again. And here's somebody who latched on to the interestingly. A lot of people are writing about like I never saw clowns the same way again or whatever. But like, yeah, just the idea of. Despite it's so interesting. My sister is a middle school teacher, and she talks about a lot of the kids. She sees a lot of kids reading it, which is always kind of like, because at first she's like, I don't know, and then she's like, I guess I kind of see, but at the same time, there's a lot of weird shit in there. That's even okay to a certain extent. I mean, like I'm this guy. No, I don't have kids, of course, but I'm always like, aside from some of the weirder stuff, but I'm talking about like, I always think it's kind of good for kids to get like a little outside of their comfort zone, like be a little bit scared, be a little bit,
Yeah, like it's very funny. I just a brief anecdote diversion, but like my dad was more of a Dean Koontz fan than a Stephen King fan. Like he's
unconventional.
Yeah, very definitely liked Stephen King.
Not the popular opinion.
A ton of Dean Koontz novels.
Oh, and Dean Koontz was fucking banned in my house.
But so my dad would like encourage me to read his Dean Koontz novels, all of his weird fantasy novels that he still had from when he was a teenager. And like I was the one who was like, reading this fucking horror or mystery or thriller, and it's like there's a sex scene, and I'm like, I have to hide this under my bed for 3 months. Like,
yeah.
Like I was like, I'm gonna, even though my dad gave this to me to read, and my mom also said it was okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get in trouble for reading this.
Yeah, I had that same thing. I remember, like I would bring books to school too, like to go like free reading, and then be like, I didn't know this was in here. This is yeah. As if anyone's gonna know what's on the page of what I'm reading. We're like, Jesus Christ, okay.
Yeah, reading shonen manga at school is doing that on hard mode.
Yeah,
because I distinctly remember reading this. I think it's the second volume of Tite Kubo's Bleach.
Yeah.
Has,
boy.
The bustiest character on the front of the book, and I'm just like reading it, like trying to hide that.
Yeah,
like,
I don't know anything.
God.
I don't know anything about this. Yeah. Comics are a whole other thing too. 'Cause now there are visuals involved. But yeah, no, I think that's an interesting thing about. And one thing I wanted to touch on, because it's a and we'll talk about it even more because there's direct correlations to it. But in some ways, is Stranger Things the more distilled, even more palatable version of it?
I was going to bring that up, and I think that there was a time when it was, but now it's on its like
they're going into
7th season or something. So
5 or 6, I think, is what the
5
next
or
is.
6.
Yeah.
Okay, so at some point it was, but.
Yeah.
It is now gone on long enough that I do not think it qualifies as being a more distilled.
It's true. It's become just
story.
as sprawling at this point. Yeah, but I always thought like, this is and at one, because we'll talk about that the Duffer Brothers almost made the It movie. We'll talk about when we get to the Muschietti movies. I'll talk about, because there's a great podcast called Best Movies Never Made, and they did a whole special just about attempts to adapt It as a movie.
Oh, nice.
And so we'll talk about how the attempt to make another version of It was a long process.
Okay. I will say that I don't think that Stranger Things is the more like stripped down, distilled, but I do think it is the logical conclusion.
I think it's maybe not distilled, but I'm like, it's maybe more approachable or more mainstream in some ways. Like I do, and it is a little bit more YA. Like it has some of the I mean, I
Yeah.
love Stranger Things. So I don't mean that as like a negative necessarily, but like, yeah, it's a little bit more for everybody in a
Yeah.
way, because that it does that. Well, because the thing that's so great about Stranger Things, right, is King is a big influence, but then that's sanded down by the Spielberg influence, right? It's sort of that King Amblin combination, and that really became that like, oh yeah, this is a distillation of a kind of feeling of a lot of 80s sci-fi and horror, because there's some Carpenter in there too. I mean, because the Duffer Brothers, from every interview I've seen, are very much guys like us who are like, oh yeah, we're obsessed with this shit, and it's just, here's everything we like into this show. And I'm very curious, because when they're done with Stranger Things, they're doing The Talisman for Netflix.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's their.
Okay.
I'm like, okay, yeah, that's the thing where I'm like, well, I don't know about The Talisman, but it's like, Duffer Brothers doing Talisman. Yeah, okay. I could see that. I could see that. That's like,
I think that would probably, like, if you were to ask me, like, we're gonna make a Talisman thing, who do you think should helmet? Like, that's probably the best choice.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad and also the idea of doing it as a Netflix series is also, rather than trying to jam that into a movie, because that would be tough. All right, let's look at somebody who didn't like this. And this, I had to pick this review just based on, I love the title of this review because it's so hyperbolic and it's a great use of this word. This comes from Daniel NC 180, who titles the review "Huge Fiasco."
Oh, beautiful.
And just everything about it is great, because the first sentence is, "I really do not like being a drama queen," which immediately tells you this person fucking loves being a drama queen.
Oh yeah,
adores it. But I'm gonna make no bones about my discontent.
My God.
First and foremost, I am speaking on behalf of all those who read the book beforehand. The movie was completely underwhelming, a huge letdown, a total fiasco. It doesn't live up to the book's reputation at all. The characters are clumsily portrayed to begin with, on account of the unskillful actors, except some of them, for one. And because the story not only was truncated, excruciatingly short, that could be a good thing in some cases, but in this one, believe me, it is not. But a great deal of key moments were altered, which can't be but a shortcoming, at least for the readers. Some of us, the readers, resolved to watch the movie if there is an adaptation after liking the book. One of the chief reasons being to see how they were going to imagine the character, or how the way we imagine the characters contrast with the way they are enacted in the movie. And there is a huge difference, because Beverly sounded a lot more beautiful in the book. And in the movie, while in her childhood, she is, well, ... not so much. Ben was
buddy. Hey, buddy.
Yeah.
Hey, buddy.
Yeah. Oh, you'll like this. If you enjoyed that, wait for this comment. Ben was described as quite a bit fatter and shyer, and here he was all cool smiles, ballsy, and stuffed with innuendos. Stuttering Bill, same situation. In the book, he is, at adulthood, bald, and he has reddish hair, the same way as Beverly should be an auburn-haired chick, and she isn't. All of them are more or less messed up in comparison with what the book's description, with what the book describes them to be like. Also, the movie seemed to me as really, really fast-paced, and an outsider could hardly make sense of the events. Now, I didn't see the whole movie, because like I said, I was nothing but struck dumb by the movie's incapability to rise up to the mark. And because the book's finale was as well a bit anticlimactic, but that's a whole other story. Long story short, readers of the book, beware of this smoke and mirrors thing. There is nothing to it. If you want to see something else and not a time, this is my favorite part because it has nothing to do with anything. If you want to see something else and not a time waster, a warm recommendation would be Psycho. Yep, the 1960 black and white one. 1 out of 10 stars. And just like, and by the way, here's another thing in a completely different type of horror.
Yeah, like, is it trying to be like this black and white movie from a million years ago is better than
I think that's the thing where it's like, yeah, I'm talking about the black and white one.
Before they invented color.
Yeah. Boy, oh boy, though. That is...
Wowzers. Very nitpicky.
Very nitpicky. That is meaner and dumber than a Brendan Jones complaint, but I'm used to those sort of arguments where it would be like, excuse me, the hair was redder.
Yeah. Listen, okay, I that I also think that her hair should have been red. Like it
Sure.
listen, but it's like but only because there is like a fucking a load-bearing poem that
Yeah.
describes
The
it as such.
was it the Auburn? What was it? Was it
Your
the
hair is winter fire, January
winter?
embers. My
That's a
heart burns there too.
that's pretty advanced shit, by the way, for a like a 13-year-old to be writing.
Yeah.
I was not gonna be able to get more than like you're really cute. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think. Yeah, embers and shit. I don't think he'd be writing. No, yeah, that is incredibly nitpicky, and also like, I don't know, is Bev described? I mean, like this Emily Perkins is really well cast because she looks like, to me, like the girl you would have a crush on in middle school, where it's like that'd be like the cute, pretty girl, and also she's kind of tomboyish too, which would also make sense for being part of the losers club, right? Like I think
Yeah.
similar. That's why I also love the casting of Sophia Lillis. It's like they are. I mean, once again, it's so weird because they're kids too. When I'm talking about, they are like, but like they're cute. They're cute, and you see that they would be like the crush of these kids, especially
Yeah.
these nerdy kids who would just be like, "Oh my god, a girl." So yeah, I fuck off, man.
I get a little like when it's like, yeah, this 12-year-old should have been hotter.
Yeah.
It's like, okay,
Come
can
on,
you
man.
think about? There's got to be a better way to say that.
Yeah, they're really should be way prettier, okay? And bend and build and stutter enough.
Like, okay,
I don't know.
Make your own movie then.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to all right, so that wraps up It 1990. Next week we are going into the first of the non-adaptation sequels to adaptations, with Pet Sematary 2.
Yeah.
A movie I haven't seen in a long time. I
me neither.
vaguely remember this movie. Mary Lambert returning to direct it, which I think is very interesting. And I'm pretty sure no involvement at all from King.
Yeah, I'm almost positive.
Yeah, but like, yeah, because we'll be touching on these, because I think that's fascinating. The movie sequels that spin out of the adaptations of his stuff is fascinating to me, because we'll also be looking at the Carrie sequel. And then, interestingly, we also will be doing Dr. Sleep at some point, which is a movie adaptation of a sequel to one of his books that was also adapted twice.
Yes.
Yeah, so very interesting to see what becomes of that. But yeah, that will be next week on the show. But I think we'll wrap up the IP Squad for this week by saying that for right now, this case file is closed.
Hi. My name is Stephen King. I'm gonna scare the hell out of you, and that's a promise.